Hi everyone, welcome to the second section of How Should I Live? So in this section, we're going to be focused on the question, why be good? So the thought here is, what reason do you have to do things that are morally good? What reason do you have to not commit crimes, not lie to your friends, and so on? The first answer to this question we're going to consider is that we shouldn't be good. Rather, we should just appear to be good. So we can make this clear by considering an example. Suppose you see a pile of cash sitting in the ground and you think to yourself, well, I could take that. And then you think, I could take that. You notice it belongs to someone else. It's not just free cash lying around, it belongs to someone else. But that person isn't looking. And it seems like you could take the cash without noticing that them noticing that you've taken it. And perhaps no one will notice that you've taken the cash. It will just be your secret. You'll have all this money and it'll be yours. Now, in this situation, what do? Do you steal or do you not steal? You have these two options, let's suppose. You can either take the money or not take the money. Take the money, invest it, spend it on fancy things, or not steal it and continue to be poor or less wealthy if you're already wealthy. So what do? You might have an answer there. You might think, yeah, I'll definitely steal. No one will find out. Definitely won't steal. But the more important question for us today is why? Why do you decide to steal or not steal? What's the reason for you taking a particular decision over another? What's the reason for you wanting to steal rather than not steal? So let's consider our choices again. If I got steal or don't steal. So in favor of stealing, you might think, well, no one's going to find out. I could just keep this money and live happily ever after in my beach resort that I bought with all my stolen money. And you might also think, well, this person that I'm stealing from has enough money. They're not going to miss it. It's fine for me to take. In favor of not stealing, you might think, well, I'll get caught. Someone will find out. I'll never be able to take this money and put it in the bank. Someone will find out. They'll see me. Oh no. And you might also worry about a further consequence of being caught. You might be hated. People will think you're a thief. They won't trust you. They won't want to be around you. They'll think, well, I can't leave my phone and my money around this person because they will steal from me, like they stole from that other person. So these are reasons for and against stealing the money. Again, the question is, okay, suppose you decide to not steal. Some people might be a bit more saintly than you and think, I'm not stealing because not stealing is the morally good thing to do. The question here is, why do we care about doing what's morally good? Is it just because we'll be caught? We care about being caught, or we care about being hated? Or do we care about morality in and of itself? We care about doing what's right over doing what's wrong. It's important here when we're thinking about this kind of question, the question of why be good, or why do we care about morality, or why do we care about being morally good, or choosing to act on morally good reasons. It's important to think about what kind of question this is. So in philosophy, the distinction between a descriptive question and a normative question is going to be a very important one. Both questions are important in different ways. So a descriptive question is just asking you to describe reality. If you say something is descriptive, it really is just saying to describe what's the world like. So there's a question, do you care about being morally good, which is just descriptive. If you thought, I would steal in this thought experiment or I would not steal, there's a matter of fact about what you would do over in that situation. It could be the case that you would steal and it could be the case that you wouldn't steal. It's just a fact. That would be a descriptive fact. It'd be something that describes reality, describes your mental life, your psychology, your character, how you would choose in this hypothetical situation. There's another question, and one we're going to be more interested in. This is the normative question. This is, should you care about being good? So when we think of normative questions, one way to think of this is it's describing what reality ideally should be like. That's just a gloss. And as you go through philosophy, you'll find more precise and different answers to this question because the nature of normativity is somewhat controversial. But for our present purposes, we can think of normativity as trying to describe what reality is ideally like, not what it actually is like. So when we say that, for example, someone ought not steal, we would prefer a world in which people didn't steal. The world would be better if people didn't steal. So whilst there might be a matter of fact about whether you would steal or not steal, and whether you care about morality or whether you don't care about morality, it's a different question whether you ought to care. Because it could be that, suppose you do care about morality. It could be that you shouldn't. Maybe you're making a mistake. You actually do care about morality, but you don't have any reason to, or any good reason to. Likewise, or on the other hand, it could be that you don't care about morality, but you ought to. So we're going to be focusing on this normative question. And here we think of why be good. We're really asking why be morally good, right? And our focus initially is going to be on Plato's Republic. So in the Republic, it's a dialogue involving Socrates and his various followers and various interlocutors. And the Republic has wider aims than the aims of this section. So in 1b, we're asking, how should I live? And the Republic overall is concerned with that question as well. It's concerned with how we should all live, both as individuals and in communities, how we should live in and of ourselves and with other people. In answering that question, Plato addresses the question of why be good. And we're going to be focusing on that part that he addresses, and less so on the wider other parts of the Republic. We're really going to be focusing on books 1 and 2 and the relevant parts to why be good. But if you're interested to read more about Plato, I encourage you, because there's lots of stuff relevant to the overall question of how should I live, even though here in this section, we're just going to focus on one part of Plato. So let's now dive into the Republic. So the part we're most interested in here is where Socrates is at a party. So Socrates has been invited by Cephalus and his 2 sons, Polemarchus and Lysias. And Socrates comes along with his merry band of friends, including Glaucon and Adeimantus. Just a little side note, that I'm not very good at pronouncing these Greek names, so I'm probably going to pronounce them in numerous different ways which are likely incorrect. Just bear with me. In any case, here's the scene. We've got this house party in effect, and we've got Cephalus, Polemarchus, Lysias, and then Socrates, Glaucon, Adeimantus, and others around. So Cephalus, he's old, and he's old, so he can't really get any of the physical pleasures that he could have gotten back in those ancient Greek days, like food, drink, or sex. And so he thinks this is the time to start doing some philosophizing. If I can't really enjoy these other things because I'm old and decrepit, I might as well do philosophy. That's what's left over, I guess, when those other things aren't things you can enjoy anymore. So Cephalus, Frank says here, you ought to come here more often, for you should know that as the physical pleasures wither away, my desire for conversation and its pleasures grow. So Cephalus is making clear here that philosophy is kind of like that thing you're left over with when everything else goes a little bit sour and you can't enjoy it anymore. So the conversation gets on to justice and morality more generally. And Polemarchus and Cephalus, they think justice and morality are just a matter of following a few simple rules. It's not really that difficult. You just follow these rules, like, don't steal, don't kill, don't lie. Just follow that and it's fine. You don't really need to worry about morality so much. You follow those rules and you're good to go. And as you read through the Republic, you'll see that at least one interpretation here is that Cephalus and his sons are representing moral complacency. They're the kind of people that just don't worry about morality. They'd rather focus on their own lives and their own interests. And, this whole being moral business, I'll do it, but, who really needs to reflect on it and do stuff like that? Perhaps people who are like this. Perhaps you yourself are like this. Nothing, perhaps don't see anything wrong with that. But Cephalus and his sons, they're morally complacent, because they're privileged, respected, wealthy people, and who just accept things as they are. They don't want to really go around questioning the rules that they're supposed to follow. They just want to follow them and continue to be privileged, respected, and wealthy. And one way in which they've done that is just by conforming and following the rules and not really reflecting more deeply on the reasons why it's wrong to steal or wrong to kill or wrong to lie. Just accept it. It's fine. That's just what it is. They're not interested in that. They're not that inquisitive that they really want to get deeper into the questions here. So moral complacency. You might, like I said, are you morally complacent? You might think, well, after hearing that, maybe I'm morally complacent. For example, one way to think about this is, do you avoid reflecting on what's morally right and wrong? Do you avoid thinking about how you can morally improve yourself? Do you just focus on your life at the expense of thinking about morality and other people? Well, then you might be morally complacent. Don't worry. Perhaps, as we'll see in later parts of the lectures, maybe there's nothing really wrong with being morally complacent. Maybe we ought not to be morally complacent. These are amongst some of the later questions and later answers to the question we'll consider in this section. But also, when we're focusing on Plato, Plato is very much against moral complacency. Plato thinks if you're morally complacent, gone wrong, something's gone wrong there. You've really got to be thinking about these things. You've really got to be carefully examining your beliefs about how you should live. And you can't just take them for granted. You have to think, well, if the rule is don't steal, does that mean that in all situations I should never steal? I should never, ever steal. If the rule is don't lie, should I never, ever lie? Plato thinks we have to reflect on those kinds of rules and hypothetical situations and real situations we've encountered to think whether that's the morally right thing to do. We have to try and develop a bit more sensitivity, a bit more moral sensitivity to figure out what we can do or what we ought to do in different situations. We can't just get a list and think, okay, moral, I'll be moral. How do I be moral? Well, don't steal. Okay, so I've got this opportunity to steal, so don't steal. Be moral. Got this opportunity to lie. Well, it says here, don't lie. Why? Oh, I don't know. I've just got to not lie. That's it. He thinks that that's bad. You can't just follow things like a recipe. You have to really be able to think about things through and think of how these different rules we have can come into conflict or how they can be inconsistent in various ways. So really we have to be examining things, reflecting, thinking, philosophizing. So when we think about common sense and Socrates, so Socrates is Plato's mouthpiece in the Republic and whose views Plato is trying to represent. So common sense will say things like tell the truth and don't kill, whereas Socrates thinks it's a little bit more complicated. Socrates says, well, sometimes a good and just person will lie. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Maybe someone's feelings will be hurt. Maybe there's an axe murderer at the door and you have to lie about who's at home, or you have to lie about being home and they're convinced by you saying, well, I'm not home. Maybe that's just what you have to do. So the good and just person will sometimes kill. But here Plato, whilst he's out to attack moral complacency, he does agree with common sense that there is a way that we should live, both individually and together in society. He thinks here that, yeah, there's something that we ought to be doing. There's a proper and morally correct way of living one's life. We just need to reflect to make sure that we've got it right. We have to make sure that the rules we have, whether personal or public rules we have about morality are correct. We have to reflect on them and to make sure they're consistent. And so when Plato's saying here that there's a way we should live, he's saying this is a moral should. It's asking about the morally good or right way to live. just as a quick kind of primer into when we talk about the moral should, we're thinking about domains of normativity. So none of this is, this other normative domains are going to come up throughout the different lectures. And I don't think you should worry about this too much. This is a very rough characterization. But roughly when we think about the normative, we're thinking about the things we ought to do, ways the world ideally ought to be like. And so one way of thinking about normativity is just morality. So there's just moral reasons to act. As we'll see, people also think that there are prudential reasons. People also think that there are epistemic reasons, or people also think there are aesthetic reasons. The main two we're going to be considering in the first couple of lectures are moral and prudential reasons. And some people will see these as overlapping. But for the moment, just intuitively, it seems like these might be separate. When we think about what we ought to do, there's a question about what we morally ought to do. There might be a question about what's in our self-interest. And these two questions of what we ought to do are maybe different. So that's just a quick primer, something we'll return to when we think about distinguishing different types of should. So according to Plato, just to end this first section, according to both Plato and common sense, there is a morally good way to live. And this way of living includes being just, since justice is a virtue. But it's not just about following rules. The thought here is that once you have these virtues, you're a bit more sensitive. You're able to just not, follow your recipe. You're able to think through the particularities of different situations and, do what's morally right, but in a way that you've reflected on it and you've made sure that you're getting what's morally right in that situation.